The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the guests or hosts, and not necessarily those of the advertisers, networks, platforms, or stations. Warning that the content of the show may not be suitable for all audiences, and that viewer discretion is advised. The show does not intend to provide medical, legal, or financial advice, and viewers or listeners should consult with a professional before making any decisions based on the information presented.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio Live. I'm your host, Jack Carey, and we are broadcasting from 300 feet deep in an abandoned nuclear missile silo somewhere lost in the post-apocalyptic wastelands of the Dakota Territories, and I am joined, as always, by the paranormal crime-fighting duo Daisy and the Sundance Kid. And we've had a little break. Good to be back.
Hold on, Jack. Something's going on. You're getting a little garbly. I don't know what happened there. Check your wire real quick.
Yeah. I'll kick my computer. How's that?
Sounds good now. Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's the internet and live radio. What are you going to do? But it was an interesting, relaxing week. There were some good stuff to come out in Paranormal in the News. Big segment on my show. And, we are on the great space roller coaster Earth, and who would ever believe that we would have a major mainstream congressman go on to a tier 1 podcast. That's like Joe Rogan-like podcast. I won't mention exactly which one it is, but if you go into YouTube and look up Eric Burleson, I don't want to get in trouble for mentioning other people's channels. Sometimes that happens. Eric Burleson, the congressman, was on a mainstream, hugely popular, hundreds of thousands of viewers podcast, and he talked about alien hybrids. I mean, would you have ever believed in the last 10, 20 years? A lot of us are old timers. We've been doing this for a very long time, and we remember imagining a congressman going on to openly discussing the idea that alien hybrids are in fact living among us, and that fact has been briefed to President Trump, and he has direct knowledge of that fact. That would never be, you couldn't make that up and have anybody believe it. You couldn't have written that into a fictional story and gotten it published. There's just no way. Nobody would believe it. They would laugh it off. And here we are today in the age of rolling disclosure. Let's call it that. You have Stern congressman, fresh to Washington and all of that, on a major podcast, and he's talking about alien hybrids walking among us. Now that's got to be some kind of record of fiction becoming fact, right? Because nobody in the last 20 years that I've ever talked to about the research from Dr. David M. Jacobs or Bud Hopkins or Linda Moulton Howe or, the list goes on and on, Whitley Strieber, any of them that really believed anything I had to say, presenting them with the really overwhelming evidence that not only was there a hybridization program occurring between our species and another species, but that it's possible, if you listen to the likes of Richard Dolan, to explain the totality of all UFO activity being nothing but a side effect of this program. In other words, we just keep seeing their craft coming and going or whatever. Those craft are all engaged in the same program of hybridization. It's one big program and all the craft are involved. And, you know, he runs some equations that are pretty interesting when you listen to them about, you know, you could make a case. I'm not saying that is the case. I'm saying it's an interesting, you know, part of this, the architecture of this particular wormhole. So here we are. You got this mainstream congressman, and he is on the Senate House Intelligence Committee on Secrets. It's a new one that they have with Representative Anna Paulina Luna and Tim Burchison, from the congressman from Tennessee. And Anna Paulina Luna, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, is the one who says that she was taken into the SCIF. She was shown top secret files. A SCIF is a facility that you are allowed to go into to view if you have a security clearance sufficiently high enough. You can go into these facilities, and in them are housed the most secret documents that we have. And if you're allowed to be read into them, like she is, because she is the head of this secrets committee, I think Trump was the one who got this whole thing kind of rolling. She says that they showed her files that proved to her conclusively that these beings, at least the ones shown to her in this file, were extra dimensional in nature. They came from another dimension. That's in keeping and matching with early FBI memos we have from roughly around the time of Roswell, talking about a space alien species having come here through an interdimensional portal, created, however, by our nuclear testing. It is interesting cross pattern to note that the UAPs have a constant presence around all of our nuclear facilities and ships and everything else. If those memos from the FBI in 1947 are correct, and it says that our nuclear testing somehow damaged their world in another dimension, it's like a planet, but it's on the ether. You're going to have to get used to terms like ether, because that is what even the Congress people are talking about right now. Think of the ether as sort of the matrix out of which our reality is formed. It's a good way to put it. But if you have creatures that are living on a planet that basically is the same spot in space as our planet, but in another dimension. Somehow the nuclear testing penetrated that wall between dimensions and it damaged their planet. And then they decided that they were going to come through the hole and try to colonize. Their genetics aren't sufficient in this dimension in order to colonize a planet like the Earth. So they began a hybridization program, and apparently they are exquisite genetic masters of, genetic experimentation. If not them, then the praying mantis beings that appear to be in charge of the gray aliens certainly are. And who's to say that they are, anything more than a type of artificial intelligence created by an even greater intelligence of some kind, whom we've not even seen. We may have not even seen the real face of the alien presence that's interacting with us. There's a concept in sci-fi and a concept in science itself. that states that any sufficiently advanced civilization won't ever purposely expose itself to another alien species of any kind, even if it thinks itself superior. Why would you do that when you are so advanced that you can create living beings that work like machines on your behalf to go out and engage that life form for you and to send back intelligence and data, so that you're never exposed to any sort of risk and your species is never exposed to the risk, only your technology? That's something that even, they're called von Neumann probes for those of you that like to deep dive these kind of things. So, and it was Arthur C. Clarke, the inventor of the telecommunications satellite, and the great science fiction author, who said that any sufficiently advanced science will be indistinguishable from magic. Think about that for a minute. Any sufficiently advanced science will be indistinguishable from magic. And what are we seeing with this technology? We are seeing a technology that behaves to us like magic. It even creates things like apotheum effects where it bends time in a localized fashion. That's incredible stuff. The stuff previously only of science fiction novels, and now we are seeing all of this sort of bubble up to the surface of what's coming out of some very well-informed and high-ups in the Pentagon, and in the government, and the Congress, and the Senate, and various military positions. It's all beginning to bubble up in a way that appears to be more than what the powers that be that are trying to keep this all contained are able to deal with. I have mentioned previously that the Webbot has stated many times that this alien intelligence has a self-revealing nature to it. In simple terms, what that means is that ultimate disclosure will occur on its terms, not on ours. And that's because it has a self-revealing nature to it. Once it begins to ascertain that it can safely reveal itself to our species, we'll probably begin to see the true face of whatever this true alien intelligence is that the gray aliens and the others appear to be just parts of. And of course, all of this feeds back into ultimately to my unified field theory of paranormal activity, in which I state in my book, Paranormal Planet, that I wrote 20 years ago, that all paranormal activity appears to divide into two separate trunks of the same tree, branches off the same trunk, if you will. One of those branches is activity derived from an interdimensional source, and the other is derived from Earth's interaction with its parent society. Let's call it a parent society. That's such a better term than a type 3 civilization on the Kardashev scale, which is how we normally would put that. There was a Russian scientist, his name was Nikolai Kardashev. He came up with the idea that if you could judge how advanced a civilization was, then you could judge it by its power consumption. The idea being that the greater your technology, the greater the amount of power it would take to power that technology, etc., etc. this led them down a line of logic that stated that they would eventually create these huge spheres that would encompass neighboring stars around their planet, and these spheres would literally absorb all the energy from that star and redirect that energy in a way that would benefit the species to power their technology to go out and colonize other planets, etc., right? And this would be a step-by-step, wash, rinse, repeat process as you went through a galaxy, right? I mean, first you would send out your intel probes. You would detect what life there was. If you had some sort of ability to terraform planets, those probes would tell you which planets had the ability to be terraformed. The next wave would go out and begin to terraform. The next wave plants it with genetics. And eventually, over billions of years, the parent civilization comes by and they begin to farm back these civilizations into its own fold. You have to think much, much bigger than what we've been thinking before, on a huge galactic scale, right? And then on top of this whole thing, we have weird cross currents like the so-called plasmoid beings. Trust me, this won't be the last time you hear this term. Who knew in the world of ufology and the world of paranormal research, out of all of the alien taxonomy we've been able to ascertain from various researchers over an 80-year period, who would have thought that it was the plasmoid beings that the government's about to come out and tell us about? That's the first part of the hey, we got a lot of aliens to tell you about, snowball to get rolling. You know what I mean? To hear Eric Burleson tell it in his recent testimony, he says that the intelligence communities have been actively getting together various religious leaders from various Christian communities and sects around America, and they are assembling them, and then they are having these sort of meetings with them, disclosure meetings, where they are telling them, guys, this thing is rolling fast. We're begging you to get your people prepared for disclosure that's about to come. Right? And that's very interesting. And then you have Eric Burleson telling us that in the same podcast testimony that he was approached. He called it bumped, right? He was at a congressional meeting where these mysterious, intelligence agents showed up, and, during the break of one of these hearings or whatever, they kind of bumped into him and said, we can't even tell you our names, or who we work for, but we're basically conducting a clandestine investigation into the religious implications of UAPs. In other words, he said that these guys were devoutly, Christian people. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I'm describing the architecture of the rabbit hole. This is what is going on behind the curtain, behind the scenes, right? Behind the scenes, there are, evangelical Christian-like people at the Pentagon involved in the UAP research around the periphery of it. embedded, if you will, by way of the so-called Collins elite, and apparently this other group, which isn't part of the Collins elite, as far as Eric Burleson is aware, he says. And they are sort of waging a ideological war behind the scenes, because in their minds, all of that is evil. The UAPs, their activity, the hybridization program, the entities themselves, the fact they came from another dimension, that's all just pure out demonic. You know, that's the way they see it, and they will act accordingly. That is something I learned very well early on in my interaction with various esoteric groups around the world, of which I had a lot of contact many, many years ago with various groups. The one thing I learned intimately was that these were people who believed a certain way and who acted accordingly. You have to keep that in mind, because it's in the acting accordingly to a belief system that you find ultimate motive, and it's an ultimate motive that you find all of the various dominoes that we can see that are about to fall, what have you. So you have this sort of ideological battle taking place. You have congressmen on major podcasts. Tim Burchett's been on a ton. Anna Paulina Luna's been on a ton. They're all talking about aliens. They're talking about hybrids. They're talking about reptilians. They're talking about things that used to get a tinfoil hat put on to the rest of us, right? And all kinds of ridicule, and called total nutcases or weird or what have you. I'm sure I alienated more than my share of both friends and family members over the course of a 30-year period, having brought up the topical discussions on a number of paranormal subjects that to them isn't a part of any sort of reality they want anything to do with. They just don't. You know, it's a big no.
But you set them right. You set them straight, though, Jack. Right?
That's right. You know, now I hope, in my old age, as I'm mellowing, that they look back on some of those conversations and say, you know, old Jack, he probably wasn't as crazy as I at first made him out to be. Now, that's not to say I'm not spectacularly insane, because I am. However, crazy I am not. And so it is an interesting place in which we find ourselves. So as we go down and continue to describe the architecture of this particular rabbit hole, because his testimony leads us down some really interesting places, we're going to discover that really underlying some of these interactions with some of the whistleblowers, apparently who were there at the facility, right next to the craft. One of them was in a combat scenario overseas. Apparently we either captured or this was our technology. He's not sure. He was allowed to see a floating black orb that was blacker than black. Light could not escape it. That's what he said. And that it gave him a distinctly ominous, evil-like feel as he walked around it. And he said that people naturally were repelled from this thing. We'll get back to this rabbit hole right after our break.
All right, Jack. Great job.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Crazy Uncle Jack.
That's right. I am crazy Uncle Jack.
Yeah.
Crazy cousin Jack. Crazy brother Jack.
Yeah. Everybody has them in a family. At least one.
It's that one conspiracy nut that they cringe to invite to the Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah. But most of the time their name is Bob. But anyways.
Right.
You lucked out on that one, Jack. But anyways,
I did.
I need to reach out for you to Connie. You haven't talked to Connie in years. Connie Willis.
Oh, yeah, not in a long time.
Yeah, so I'm going to reach out to see if we can get her. And if we can get her, she can help us get Jim Peniston in. Possibly.
Oh, my God.
Wouldn't that be great? That's just between us and the people that are listening right now that I'm going to try to shoot for, all right, to land you Connie first. And then you can talk to her about abductions and regression and stuff like that.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah, if we can get her. Now, she's a very busy lady, and
sure.
she started her YouTube back again, and it's her and Peniston doing it together.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's cool.
So maybe if they do it on a Wednesday night, we can combine the broadcast together if it's all right. If I can work that out, that would be great. But one thing at a time. I'll reach out to her sometime between now and next week. And I don't know if she's going to when she'll reply back, but I've had her on my old show before a couple times. Yep. So, yep.
Be fun.
Remember, what's my old show called? There goes my
Cafe
age.
Enigma?
My old timers is coming back. Yeah.
Cafe Enigma?
Cafe Enigma. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think one of those nights, you and Jack, no, you and JC were on with her. I'll have to go back. I might have to go back. That's been years ago.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
With JC being on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll shoot a line out to her. I know she's busy with Coast and her other stuff, and but I think if we can get her, that'd be a great guest for you.
Well, yeah,
but don't forget, everybody that's listening, buy Jack's books and his art.
That's right. That's right. Buy my books and my paintings.
Yeah. Shameless plugs right now.
That's right. That's right. This particular podcast is brought to you by
Jack's books.
By my books and my paintings. So there you go.
I'm trying to help you out, Jack. If we can, you go ahead and clip that out if you want later on.
No, I like it. By the way, you YouTubers, check out my new book, The Vanished Vanguard, is actually selling really well. It's about all of the missing scientists that are out there, along with the missing general, all tied to UFO research. And I delved into a real deep dive on that investigation.
Okay, Jack, I forgot to tell you we've got less than 30 seconds, but we're coming up on your countdown like right now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Jack, you're back live and on the radio side right now.
Everybody to Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio Live. I'm your host, Jack Carey. I've got a face for milk cartons and a voice for smell-o-vision, and I am your personal tour guide to the Twilight Zone. Tonight we are talking about recent testimony out of Congressman Burleson and how that leads us down many very interesting rabbit holes. Not only that, but it really, Burleson, he basically stated that he's had personal interaction with David Grush. I mean, he hired David Grush, the guy who said that he had direct knowledge that the craft had been recovered and that biologics had been also recovered inside of those craft, to the Congress. That's the guy, right? He was the, I would call him basically MIB. That guy was kind of like a man in black, right? He's the X-Files archetype of the military intelligence guy that had access to the actual UFO programs, and he knew he could point the fingers to the right people that had it, right? That's the guy. So, he had interaction with Grush and he had interaction with Jake Barber, and Jake Barber's the insider who was the special operations helicopter pilot who they tasked with going out and picking up various craft and retrieving those craft for the military and for the CIA. Now, it's interesting because Burleson on this podcast goes into some pretty exotic stuff, some pretty shocking stuff, very interesting stuff. And this leads us into, strangely enough, the realm of human trafficking, which is very strange, and this idea, because now, it's not just this testimony out of Jake Barber. There's some others that are pointing the finger in this direction. Barber says that the CIA and other various deep black intelligence type groups involved with the UFO, UAP / alien / hybridization program have been doing some really nefarious stuff. They have been going around to third world countries, locating people in those countries via agents on the ground who exhibited psychic abilities, and then they disappeared those people into a form of human trafficking. That human trafficking was for people that were actively psychic, that could use their psionic abilities, if you will, to help with the UAP program. They then apparently began to use these people to summon the UFOs, because you can psionically connect your consciousness with that of one of these craft, and you can get it to land. They have been actively doing that and then recovering the craft. Also, they are using EMP weapons, cannons. This was something actually first described by the great Joseph McMoneagle of CIA Stargate fame, who was as far as I'm concerned, the all-time, all-star, better than Ingo Swann, remote viewer that they ever had. If you've not read the work of him, then you should do so, because it's truly amazing. He does have a number of books that he's put out, and a lot of them had future predictions, which now have all come true. But it was Joseph McMoneagle who basically stipulated the same thing, that he remote viewed something that was exactly that the CIA had developed an EMP weapon of some kind, and that they were knocking these UFOs out of the sky. Now, could this somehow be cross-referenced in the rabbit hole over to A lot of testimony coming out of so-called whistleblowers that approached Linda Moulton Howe over many years, as well as, well, a lot of various footage that has been captured, quite frankly, in which I have on a film on my YouTube channel called UFO Wars. If you want to see an example of what I'm talking about, could all of this be cross-referenced over to my friend, late, great Nick Pope, very nice man, where he said that the UFO phenomenon contains a truth too terrible to be told. We have to ask ourselves, what would a truth too terrible to be told sound like? Might it sound like UFOs in combat with one another, caught on film? And might that cross-reference over to whistleblower testimony given to Linda Moulton Howe that stated that they knew that there was a conflict between alien species for control of this planet and, by the way, control of the human species? Is that a truth too terrible to be told? I think so. Because what if the bad guys win on that one? Right? And the human species basically just becomes enslaved by an alien. Neurologically superior alien species. See, it's not enough that they're technologically superior, because technological superiority can be overcome psionically. Something I wrote about in my book, American Sorcerer, 30 years ago. Which has now become something which is exactly what is being taught to these people in the psionic program. It is a combination of esoteric techniques combined with the Stargate program's control protocols, developed with hundreds of millions of dollars under laboratory conditions to prove that psychic functioning was occurring and not something that just appeared to be psychic functioning. That is all in my book, American Sorcerer. You can also check that out if you want to deep dive that subject and the idea of how to basically use ancient techniques and exercises in order to increase your own psionic abilities. Which is very strange, by the way, Mark, because that book has started to sell very well lately, and I can't, that's just odd because there's no advertisement for it or anything like that, and all of a sudden it just picks up. I can't figure that out, but... Well,
they were psychic about it. In between all of this stuff, we kept saying, buy Jack's books, all right? Mm-hmm. Of course, they're psychic. They just learned a little bit ahead of time.
Right, maybe that's it. I don't know. But if you want to know the secrets that I was able to extract out of many esoteric groups over a very prolonged period of time, they all wound up in my book, American Sorcerer. And I married what they told me with the actual control protocols developed by the CIA to control the psychics used in the remote viewing programs. This allowed groups to actually conduct scientific testing under the same laboratory conditions for psychic functioning that they've been hoping they were getting the whole time. It's a game changer. So, but anyway, apparently, according to Barber's testimony to Burleson and a bunch of other people, and they believe him. There's no doubt about it. Like, they totally believe this guy. And I do too. I'm not saying I don't believe him. I think he's telling the truth. But how bizarre, right? You couldn't write this stuff into a fictional novel and have anybody buy it that didn't laugh and say, oh, God, this guy is just full of you know what, This author's is just making stuff up out of his just, you know what? No, this is the truth. This is how all of this is lining up. And you couldn't make this stuff up if you had the best imagination on earth. You just have to sit back and laugh and say, oh my God, the universe really does have a sense of humor, and we are getting a full dose of all of that right now. So, yeah, you have all of that going on, and alongside of that, you know that if Burleson is part of the Secrets Committee, and he's been told personally that Trump was read into the hybridization program, that the hybrids were really here and walking among us. Reportedly, and I'm not making this up, reportedly, Trump looked up and said, "You mean like Adam Schiff?" So that's funny. And you can see where that sense of humor would come out during that kind of a moment. But I'm not thinking that he's somebody that's going to just sort of roll over and say, oh, well, nothing we can do about that one. No, I think the minute he got briefed was the minute that you heard the White House taking over the UFO investigation, which they have now done. This is no longer a Congress thing. This is no longer a Senate thing. The White House now has control of the disclosure investigation. And according to Burleson, they were sort of, the Secrets Committee was sort of cut out of this thing with the White House overtaking the UAP investigation and appointing its own scientific group and the whole thing, right? And then he gets on the phone and he's like, well, we don't appreciate being cut out of this thing. And they're like, well, you're not getting cut out of it. You're who we're coming to next because we don't know who to ask. Now think about that. The White House has to put together a group of experts in order to figure out what are the right questions and who are the right people to ask those questions to in order to get the right answers they need to have the doors open. Because with Congress, you can have somebody like David Grush or Jacob Barber testify all they want to, and a congressman can go up and pound on the door, but they don't have to answer the door. When it comes to the White House, they walk up and they just kick the door in. That's a whole other story, a whole other level of authority that you're not going to get out of the Senate over the Congress. And the fact that they have now taken the football out of their hands and said, all right, boys, we're going to give this one a go, might be an indication of what we're all about to see, which is going to be a real interesting continuing snowball effect of UFO disclosure. Now, this is interesting because all of this leads us into this back around into the interdimensional really problem. There's a problem with operating these craft, and apparently, according to Dr. Stephen Greer, when you operate the actual craft itself that generates the gravity and all of that, it can rip a hole in the membrane between dimensions, and when you do that, you get things that come through those little wormholes. Remember when Bob Lazar said, he flipped on the little generator thing inside the craft that they had, and, element 115 goes in the top of this thing, and which they didn't even know existed at the time, and now 20 years after his testimony, they proved element 115 was real. Anyway, when he flipped that on, that thing, he said, formed a tiny little black spot out in front of it. And that black spot was blacker than black. Light couldn't escape it. It was a tiny little black hole. That's what the propulsion system of these craft can do. And when you can generate that kind of gravity in a localized fashion, you can create interaction between dimensions. And we refer to that interaction as paranormal in nature. Now, the Pentagon and their scientists are referring to it as the hitchhiker effect. So we now know where the origin of the hitchhiker effect is coming from. It's coming from the operation of the craft themselves. When you bend space and time, you invariably cause holes between dimensions. And when you do that, you get what we describe as paranormal activity, quantumly entangling itself, if you will, with the observer. And that's stuff like poltergeist activity and, like full-on black entities walking across your bedroom in the middle of the night, all the way up to and including a full-on dog-man encounter and other cryptid animals. All of that's part of the hitchhiker effect, according to the scientists that are the best in the world that are now being employed by the Pentagon in order to study all of this. So, if there's whole communities out there right now in various paranormal subjects, on social media that have sort of walled themselves off to anything but their own sort of dogma. No pun intended. I don't know how can we fuse dogma with dogman? The dogma of dogman. Now that's a brilliant idea for a book. I'm going to do that. So, but, it's interesting because we are now in a place where the Webbot said we would be. We are in the place where sci-fi world emerges. I've said this time and again. It's the one prophecy that was made more than clear, was that not only did the alien intelligence interacting with human species have a self-revealing nature to it, but that we're probably not even seeing the real face of the real alien behind it all. So wrap your mind around that. And then on top of that, it appears as though this may have all originated in another dimension of some kind. And you're having scientists like Robert Temple, who wrote The Serious Mystery, publishing books called The New Science of Heaven, right? In which he brilliantly encodes the entire idea of the plasmoid beings actually existing as far out as the Lagrange points in space, very specific points where there are plasma clouds, and that those clouds are perhaps conscious, and that these little plasmoid being things are like little emissaries from those clouds. You can't make this kind of stuff up, right? Like, it's just crazy. Could it be that the plasmoid beings are responsible for some of the hitchhiker effect? In other words, I've long suspected that there was a singular entity masking itself as various phenomenon for some unknown purpose, but very much like the mimic octopus in our oceans, that can alter its shape, alter its color, alter its form, alter everything to make itself look like something else, like another creature, like a sea snake, like a turtle, like anything other than what it is. Really, how far of a stretch of the imagination is it to say, well, couldn't there also be an alien life form and or a natural life form on this planet that was on land dry land that had roughly that same kind of ability to just change its shape and form into something else. I think that's highly possible, right? And it might be an explanation for a lot of cryptid activity that we see. And that kind of leads us into crypto world and crypto land. See, this is a very interesting rabbit hole because the architecture it's jagged in spots, it's smooth in other spots, and it's somewhat breathtaking in some of the cavernous areas that it encompasses, because you're going from, and you're beginning to see the pieces of the puzzle form from a technology that was literally created in another reality, brought into this one. Now, what we need to ascertain is how long ago were these interdimensional portals opening and closing, because it probably wasn't just our nuclear testing that did it at one time in the 40s. But at what point did these entities begin to make it into this dimension? Because we've got what looks to be cave paintings of UFOs. Now, the plasmoid beings would be one thing. If the cavemen saw like just orbs of light, that'd be one thing. But a lot of these paintings look like disc-shaped craft. They look like nuts and bolt disc-shaped craft, right? So this goes back a very long time. Just watch Ancient Aliens. You can see all of the history of how far back it may go. But where does that lead us today? Have they genetically manipulated us to be what we are today? And if so, why would they need to hybridize with us? That doesn't make any sense. And so, was it many species who have had a hand in our genetic lineage? And why would that make sense? These are all hard questions we've got to begin to ask ourselves right now. And going back to the missing scientist, it turns out that General Neil McCaslin, the guy that's still missing, the guy that was in charge of, the Air Force's most exotic technology, and in charge of a lot of other stuff too, by the way. Eric Burleson actually goes through all of the things this man was in charge of. If anybody knew where the skeletons were buried, it was General Neil McCaslin, whose vanishing I talk about extensively in my new book, The Vanished Vanguard, but whose vanishing has still not been solved. And who Burleson claims he had already approached Neil McCaslin to interview him, and that was going to be a precursor to him testifying in front of Congress. And this was the guy. And of course they disappeared him, because they're that close. That was the point I also wanted to make with the closing of my show tonight, is that we're that close. We're so close that they're having to kill them off shortly before they get to congressional hearings, and we're noticing that they're killing them off. We're that close. That's really close, guys. When you stop to think about it, we're that close to breaking down the wall forever and having full-on UAP alien disclosure occur and sci-fi world emerge and the new economy wave sweep over the planet, and all these new technologies become available to the human species, lifespans being extended for hundreds of years. And it won't even be a problem because we won't pollute anymore, because we all have clean burning energy. That is, my friends, is a true new golden age. That is the upswing of the Kali Yuga that I keep talking about. That is the planetary cycle, and that's what happens when you pop up out of that debris field and you begin to get those beams from galactic center. You begin to absorb that energy. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Join me next week for another interesting rabbit hole. We will jump right down it and we'll explore it all the way, guys. Until then, I will see you on the radio.